All right, we're back, and we have Eva from the Graph Foundation. And as you know, I'm a big JavaScript fan, and I've talked a lot about API development yesterday, and I've mentioned GraphQL quite a few times. Over the last few years, I've pretty much transitioned all of my API work to GraphQL, and I'm just sort of in love with it. And Graph, pop out onto the scene, like a rocket here lately, and realize what they're doing, which is building essentially a GraphQL interface that you can query blockchain data with. And it's not just the GraphQL API abstraction, it's also the indexing piece where, there's just all these different sort of, there's just a lot of different data that's structured in different ways, scattered across all these various blockchains. And so, in addition to trying to expose it using GraphQL to make it easier to build applications that consume blockchain data, they're also doing a lot of, basically indexing all of that data to make it, really fast to query and get to. And so here lately, there have been a lot of new projects, basically just different blockchains that the Graph is integrating with. And so I'm just super excited to have you here, and I really appreciate your time. And I will hop off and let you take it.
Thank you. What a fantastic introduction, Leroy. I'm so excited to be here and speak with all of you guys. I hear everyone's building something on either Ethereum or some blockchain. So excited to teach you guys more about what the Graph is doing. Let me just share my screen. Okay. So I hope everyone can see this. So just a brief introduction of myself. My name is Eva Balin. I have been working with the Graph for just about 2 years and currently head up the Graph Foundation as director. I started with the initial team that was launching the Graph as sort of ecosystem, helping build out the ecosystem of Subgraph developers and all the various stakeholders. And now at the foundation, we're very focused on how do we make sure this ecosystem itself is decentralized in addition to the stack, and make sure that everyone can contribute. We really are out here to try and build and revolutionize Web3, and that means everybody contributing in different ways. So just before we get started, if you guys want any links to follow along, the Discord is the best place to talk to our developers. So what is the Graph? The Graph is a global open API, and I kind of like to think of it as a semantic web. So, in the 90s, Tim Berners-Lee had this vision of a semantic web that would index all the data and hyperlinks on the internet. And while, it's a pretty sound idea, it never really reached fruition. And so we're realizing in blockchain that the problem that the semantic web solves is actually quite critical, which is like querying data is very challenging. And standardizing the way that data is then processed by front-end developers is also challenging. And so the Graph's goal is to create this global open source API that any developer can query to use for their application. Subgraphs themselves are essentially GraphQL API, like Leroy mentioned. You can build the schema in TypeScript, so very useful for JavaScript or TypeScript developers as a way to get involved in Web3 development. Currently, you need to learn or know a bit of Solidity to sort of understand the kind of entities that you're building. But the future of subgraphs is actually more features that abstract the need to know anything about the underlying blockchain. So eventually obfuscating Web3.js with mutations and enabling developers to actually call functions directly from a subgraph. So really trying to make the subgraph a critical tool to empower developers with really expressive data. Here's a great quote from one of our, Solidity engineers that's been in the community for a while, which is, the Graph really does remove the back end. It forces you to recreate the wheel if you are building in Web 2. Anyone who's maybe querying the same smart contract has to rebuild a server and indexer for that contract. Whereas with the Graph, we're not only revolutionizing the decentralized stack, but also open source because anybody can then query a subgraph that's open source. So here's a great breakdown of some of the usage we've seen among subgraphs deployed. This is holistic, over the last year. So we see this changing, but DeFi is definitely, a top contender. And even in query volume, it actually makes up even more. But we're also seeing a lot of pickup with NFTs and arts and collectibles. So specific apps like Known Origin, Dark Forest, Decentraland, there is this growing NFT community that's beginning to query data. And we're actually focusing quite a bit on this in the foundation side, which is how do we improve NFT querying? Because there are a lot of finicky components related to IPFS and the kind of metadata you're storing, et cetera. We're also seeing a lot of adoption of Dows. So as we see these DeFi protocols become more mature, the actual app to front the governance or the voting needs to be able to query data quickly. And so the graph is really beneficial for that use case. So here's just an overview of some of the data we've seen in the last several months. As you can see, it's been over 20% growth month over month, and that's exciting to us because that means that as a proxy to Ethereum adoption, that there is consistent growth. It's not only spiking with specific bull market movements, perhaps, and it has been consistent 10 to 30% for the last 6 months. We're also seeing just an influx of new developers. So if you guys are interested in learning more, please head to our Discord and our docs. But over 14,000 developers in our current ecosystem, and the foundation's goal is really to empower everyone to either build a subgraph or contribute in the best way you can. So going back to what it is that the graph solves and does, querying blockchain data is hard. It's hard, even with its one chain, Ethereum, Geth is not super friendly. It's also difficult to, build a proprietary indexer, and that's code you have to, build per team, maybe even dedicate a specific engineer to that database. And then this becomes even exponentially harder when you have multiple blockchains. So if you're building a DeFi app that's aggregating data across chains like Ethereum and Solana, you need to have an expert then, a node expert in your team, for that chain. And the purpose of the subgraph is that you actually shouldn't have an expert. We can make global APIs, so you can query DeFi Solana data very easily just with GraphQL rather than running your own Solana node. And one of the understated benefits of the graph is the improved UX and how important that actually is. One of the criticisms that DEXs get over sexes is, the latency of the blockchain. And so, you can't trade as quickly, or maybe your transactions process, slowly. But we can actually improve a lot of UX by just how quickly we fetch data. And so using something like the graph versus a centralized server that, could have downtime is really the single point of failure, can really improve the efficiency of data and how it's retrieved for users. It also just reduces redundant work. So you can imagine there, you could calculate either labor or time cost savings from, not needing to hire a developer focused on that server, but rather just querying, a subgraph that was built maybe by another team in the ecosystem. And so the graph vision really is threefold. Number one is this open APIs, developers being able to rely on similar APIs that are standardized across, blockchains. The second one is serverless app development. And I think in the last few months, we've seen why this is so critical. So, in fall, Twitter went down because their server was hacked. Parler went down because AWS decided to stop providing services. And the graph's vision really is that if somebody in the world, aka an indexer, wants to provide that indexing service to process your queries, any application should be able to do so. And the goal being that apps should not be able to be taken down, really honing in on what the D stands for in DApp. Which is like you can't have centralized infrastructure and call it a DApp. And the third prong here is decentralizing data and really creating a market for how quickly and how high quality is the data that's being retrieved. And this is particularly exciting from like an economics perspective because we've never really seen this competition for data in Web 2 or in fiat marketplaces. And it could even advance to indexers providing different kinds of configurations on their node. It could be specific queries that are more complex being priced differently. So this brings in a lot of nuance to front-end developers that we've never seen before. So here's just a great overview of how the infrastructure differs between the graph and a centralized service. A lot of people ask us, who is the competition? And to us, the competition is simply developers choosing to remain centralized, choosing to build your own database, your server, maybe having your queries closed source. And the graph solution really is, imagine instead of one server, a network of servers or indexers that at any moment in the world are ready to serve your queries at your agreed upon price. And then also having these members called curators, which act as decentralized information curators. So we don't need to rely on centralized companies. So a little more on here is, you can imagine Uniswap, a really famous DEX, has a subgraph, and that subgraph is used by hundreds of applications today. And curators will be able to stake their GRT tokens onto those subgraphs. And that's a way of signaling to indexers which subgraphs are the highest quality and should be prioritized by indexers. So really there's like several sides of this market in terms of decentralization, because otherwise we could have indexers rely on a centralized intermediary that tells them which subgraphs are high quality, but really the point is to create a decentralized community. Everybody is incentivized to and aligned to behave in a way that's actually correct, and bringing data to front-end applications quickly. So a little more on the roles of indexers and curators. As I mentioned, curators stake GRT, and so do indexers, and that's for the economic security of the network. We ensure that indexers, if they act maliciously, are slashed, and there's also other mechanisms like cool down and thaw down periods to ensure that they can't change parameters too quickly, especially on delegators. And they earn their fees in ETH or DAI. We as a protocol are built on Ethereum, so the GRT token, the protocol smart contracts, and also the state channels are all in Ethereum. So, part of the journey for the graph and securing the graph is also contributing to the layer 2 scalability research and implementation to make it efficient for indexers and curators to receive their payments. And so both of these, receive fees based on their contributions. Indexers receive query fees that are directly paid by dApps. Delegators who also delegate GRT to indexers also receive a portion of that. And curators also receive a portion of the query fees earned by the specific subgraph they staked on. Here's a great visual of what it means really for an indexer. So, there's on-chain data that is either events, maybe it's state changes. So, some of our subgraph developers prefer events because it's very clear and it's an obvious solution, while others have started using state changes, or if they're tracking ledgers in their smart contract, to use that as a potential entity. So a lot of creativity in how you build your subgraph. That data is then indexed. And as you can see, the curator, is helping the indexers understand which subgraph is most valuable. A really clear example of where this is important is, I could build a Uniswap subgraph, and maybe the Uniswap team built a Uniswap subgraph, and there's really no way for a new developer to know which subgraph they should query. And so the curators, by signaling on specific subgraphs, can help developers and indexers understand the quality of the API, maybe even the current type of data that's being queried. We can envision a world where even the Uniswap subgraph becomes 4 different subgraphs because each subgraph is querying a specific type of data. Maybe they're doing a calculation in the subgraph. So a lot of nuance here, and curation hasn't quite launched on the network yet, but this will be, a whole universe in itself. Here's a little more about the payment flows and as they break down in the protocol. So you can think of consumers as either subgraph developers or app developers, basically anyone who would be paying the query fees. We expect this to be app developers, and we'll actually have API tokens. That way, each app is only paying for its specific queries to the subgraph. But we can also envision a world where maybe some of these subgraphs are fully subsidized. So, maybe Uniswap DAO wants to subsidize all query fees for the Uniswap subgraph, essentially making the Uniswap subgraph a public good. So there's a lot of these nuances, and because there's so many payment flows, each of them becomes sort of their own market with their own components and features based on the trade-offs for each stakeholder. And that's actually one of the things we're looking to manage and are preparing to manage is when you have 4 stakeholders like this with very different incentives, but hopefully aligning for the overall benefit. How do we manage, simple parameter changes? There are a few controversial GIPs out right now that, affect, an indexer address, that has implications for delegators. And we can definitely see this expanding where any subtle change to monetary policy might be controversial amongst the stakeholder group. Here's just a little more about, some of the payment flows for indexing. So you can imagine a negotiation, is obfuscated at the UI level, right? So you as a developer might be paying through a gateway exactly as you'd pay AWS or any cloud service provider. But what's really happening is indexers have set their prices for the queries that you're paying for, and that's based on latency. Maybe it's based on how complex the query is. Maybe it's based on other indexer configuration or services they're providing. And this is really where we think the graph ecosystem blossoms from a capitalist perspective. Is that indexers are incentivized to compete and provide the best services, which ultimately is the best for the app, anyways. And here's a little more about the curation bonding curve. So as I mentioned, curators will deposit GRT on a subgraph, and they'll actually have these curation shares minted that represent a portion of that subgraph's query fees. The intent here with the bonding curve is really to incentivize early adoption, meaning like early staking and curation on subgraphs, and then also commitment, because, you know, in theory, an attack vector could be, you know, trying to unstake and stake on a subgraph, but really that's actually just harmful to the network because, you know, the staking is a signal, it's a piece of information to the overall ecosystem. So we want curators to be committed to the subgraphs they stake on. You know, if you are staking on the Uniswap subgraph, you probably know it's going to be a high quality subgraph for a while, and you want to maintain, you know, a portion of that share. So a little more on the architecture. As mentioned, the GraphQL API really is the subgraph stronghold, but in that is a schema that's written in TypeScript, and you're also, you know, looking at Solidity code. You know, depending on your comfort level, you could maybe do more complex calculations or maybe just simple entities. As you can see here, Ethereum and IPFS are the nodes, the blockchains that are currently indexed, but we are expanding to other EVM-based chains rapidly. So Phantom and Binance Smart Chain were just recently announced, and we also announced a multi-blockchain expansion to Polkadot, Near, Solana, and Celo. And these will be upcoming over the next several months. And this is really part of the Graph vision of being blockchain agnostic, where our infrastructure, you know, is very Ethereum-centric. You know, we work with IPFS, the Graph node, and protocol contracts are deployed in Ethereum, but we believe in this blockchain agnostic universe and that the Graph still serves this really incredibly useful purpose to unite the entire Web3 ecosystem. So one of the pieces of feedback we often get is, you know, the subgraph is great, you know, this is a wonderful API, but why does it need to be decentralized? And it's really clear to us that by decentralizing the server layer, you actually reduce a lot of redundant work, right? So not every app needs to run its own server and maintain it. You also ensure that any indexer is always ready to serve your queries, which really is an incredible milestone to have for 24-hour markets and 24-hour applications like we do in Web3. You know, this really is a new paradigm in many ways, and one of them is this sort of 24-hour ongoing behavior, and indexers being up at any time, anywhere in the world, ready to serve you at a specific price, really improves user experience and developer experience. So here are a few of the major categories we're excited about for subgraph development. As I mentioned, DeFi is a hot topic. So, you know, we like to say that the graph powers DeFi. If you are building a DeFi application, subgraph, part of this is for your own efficiency. You know, an app that, you know, is able to query a subgraph really efficiently just makes UX and query time much faster. But more than that, DeFi and its composability, you know, that means that other developers can query your subgraph, which really improves, you know, the traffic and adoption of protocols, even of UIs. And we've seen subgraphs be a really great trigger point for community development in DeFi. Marketplaces, you know, especially in the NFT space, are really ramping up. We're even doing these NFT workshops weekly, where we're going through all the potential NFT subgraphs and what kind of templates we can make. So NFT marketplaces are a hot one there. And we've got a few of those already live. So Zora, Foundation, Known Origin, those subgraphs are already live and open source. So if you wanted to hack on those, definitely excited about that. And then, as I mentioned, so Dows, entertainment, social, these are a few areas that are up and coming. We'd love to see more social and content apps. I think this is just sort of a gap in Web3 in general. You know, there's apps like Mirror and also EPNS notifications, but I don't think we've seen, you know, the full potential of what we can do with social media in a decentralized way. And so in terms of developer experience, you know, the intent for a front-end developer is not to know what's going on in the back end of the Graph network. It really is to provide a seamless experience for payments. And so similar to any of the other providers you pay for, you know, you'll have a gateway access, paying with credit card or ETH, and then topping up monthly. And so, you know, the the Graph team is really focused on making sure that the developer experience is seamless, and you never have this fear of queries not being served. So here's a snapshot of what our current Network Explorer looks like. So if you go to network.thegraph.com, this is our network beta. And so the network launched in December, so it's been just over 2 months. We've seen a ton of activity. So if you go to this website, you can see all the indexers that are currently live and also the delegators. And then if you click on this, purple little button, you can actually delegate to that specific indexer. So I think the best place, if you're interested in learning more, would be to head to the network.thegraph.com, and then also check out the forum where you can learn more about delegation parameters and what it really means to be a delegator. Also, just on our mainnet success, so as I mentioned, it's been just over 8 weeks. We have over 160 indexers live globally. We have almost 6,000 delegators, and part of this is that curation isn't yet live. So a lot of people are currently delegating, and this has been really fruitful to bootstrap our indexer community. And that was really the goal, was spend the first few months really making sure the network is safe, making indexers feel safe, ensuring they have a proportional stake to the network that has them incentivized to be supportive and committed. And then as we feel comfortable, expanding to curation. And so here's just a little more on our roadmap and where we've been and where we're going. So launching curation and migrating subgraphs from the hosted service to the network is the main priority over the next several months. With that, the Graph Explorer will also be updated, and the gateway will also launch alongside some features to help subgraph developers actually interact. And then we're also focusing on the multi-blockchain and really honing in on expanding to developer communities like yourselves that may not be building on Ethereum right now. And what we're really seeing is there's actually a really grassroots community in each of these blockchain ecosystems, and it's just figuring out how to best meet their needs and getting the feedback for the nuances of their specific chains. And then lastly, Graph Foundation grants. So this is, the really exciting part of the Graph is just how much there is to build, whether it be protocol, application layer, subgraphs, or even community building. The Graph only succeeds with the success of every other member in the ecosystem, and that means having all the right tooling and feeling welcome. And so we encourage you, if you have any ideas, to apply for the Graph Foundation grants. And if it works out, a grant is possible, but we're also doing several contracting sort of type engagements, with either subgraph developers that are willing to build for other teams, or maybe dev shops that are willing to help with multi-blockchain. So let us know if you're interested in supporting. I just want to touch a little more on this decentralization, and this quote by Vitalik just really brings it home for me about why serverless applications and the decentralized stack really matters. And you just can't call an app decentralized unless the entire stack is. And we're bringing this home, at the Graph in terms of the stack. Definitely, we're working with other teams like Arweave and Saya and IPFS, but we're also doing it internally in our protocol processes. So we've developed the Graph improvement proposal process to be very decentralized and collaborative. So this is our current framework, and this is all very transient given how early we are. But we want to encourage, requests for comment, requests for proposal, and then actually submitting the proposal in ways that are constructive for the community, involving discussion early, collaborative drafts, and then also involving the foundation when it makes sense to help RFP or find the team. So if you're interested in being part of the GIP process, I'd suggest heading over to the forum. And so the way that the GIP process is decentralized is that the Graph Council is actually, the key holders to the protocol, as well as the Graph Foundation Treasury. And the Graph Council is currently 10 members that represent 5 stakeholder groups. So this is users, indexers, research and security folks, the initial team, and other active token holders. And so our process today has been, we want to make sure the community is on board. The Graph Council is not here to be authoritative. And so we've been using tools like snapshot signaling, which is a really great community signaling tool where users get to use their GRT tokens or their stake to vote and signal on specific GIPs. And this is essentially an input into the GIP process where the Graph Council, is in a meta process of accepting the feedback from the community. And then we'll proceed with parameterization or the spec, however it makes sense. And we're really excited to say that we're hosting our entire process on Radical. So Radical is a decentralized GitHub alternative, P2P network for code collaboration in a very decentralized way, literally in terms of their protocol contracts being deployed on Ethereum. They also have a P2P network, but also really, unique feature is this sort of dynamic editing that Radical has that's actually superior to GitHub. And so that enables us to actually create a decentralized group of editors without having to necessarily give them permissions. It's more about which contributors' code has been merged, and the code that has been merged the most times, is quote unquote implicitly included. And Radical has a really great interface for even tracking the differences between different implementations. So we're really excited about, even spearheading this new kind of model of decentralized editing. And then in terms of what's included, so the GIP process is protocol upgrades, so anything to the indexer node or protocol contracts, including parameterization to monetary policy, subgraph and application standards. So similar to ERCs, we are continuing to iterate on subgraph features. And at the moment, we're even trying to standardize different subgraphs per category. So DeFi, NFT, scaling, et cetera. And the last one is just any index or tooling that might be ecosystem-wide and really necessary to the protocol. So future growth, this is where, you guys, your hackathon is really exciting for us because there's so much opportunity to use subgraphs in ways we haven't even discovered. So I'd say, expanding multi-blockchain is really exciting, to create cross-chain subgraphs. Wallets and exchange and DeFi apps that aggregate data, that's a very easy use case. Anyone querying a balance or trade volume, you can do that through a subgraph really quickly. The aggregator use case definitely is interesting, especially as we launch things like Subgraph Composition. So Subgraph Composition is a feature we'll be launching, I believe, Q4. So still some time away, but basically enabling you to query an umbrella of subgraphs that are, one subgraph that's composed of many. And so you can imagine maybe creating a DeFi subgraph composed of Uniswap, Synthetics, and Aave. And so you're only making queries to the DeFi subgraph itself. We also see a lot of expansion coming in the games and collectibles era, as I mentioned. So we're working really hard with other NFT projects to create these standards to simplify querying of NFTs because the metadata is so large, and also there's a few nuances that are different for DeFi than NFT querying, and then the social and professional networks. So as I mentioned, we haven't seen as many sort of social networking, social media type of apps come out. And this could be a really great place for subgraphs to shine because of the interoperability of data that they provide. Here's just a few visual examples. So, rainbow on the right, those balances are being queried from a subgraph. Similarly, liquidity there and all that statistical analysis on exchanges is also queried from a subgraph. A few more examples, and one cool one that, it's hard to wrap your head around, but Forbes actually, is accepting ETH via Unlock Protocol, and Unlock Protocol has a subgraph. And so in theory, Forbes itself might not be using a subgraph, but the transactions that are occurring on Forbes are indexed by that subgraph. And so if you were to query that today, in essence, you're querying transactions from Forbes. Another great use case we've been thinking about, closely in the graph community is how do we better leverage subgraphs for DeFi analytics? One hot topic is total value locked, and everyone has a different way of calculating what that means, whether it's time or value-based transactions. And so we believe that subgraphs could actually help standardize this, where maybe we create a subgraph that standardizes, APY across various DeFi protocols. And the subgraph itself is some calculation. Or it contains calculations. And so this is really interesting to me in particular, and I'd love to hear if anyone else has, more complex or calculation type subgraph ideas that, you'd be willing to collaborate on. And so almost ending here, here are a few of the dApps that are using us today, but really, we hope that the graph can be the key solution for all subgraph querying, indexing in Web3. We're really honing in on the developer experience on the subgraph side and also committed to the decentralization. And so if you have any other apps that you think should be querying a subgraph, also reach out to me or apply for a grant because we are interested in helping these dApps onboard. We recognize not everyone has the resources to build a subgraph, and so we've got several dev shops and freelance developers on standby who are willing to help. And lastly, if you're interested in learning more, just head to thegraph.com/explorer, where you can see all the live subgraphs, and you can even use the playground, which is a little GraphQL playground. You can make some example queries and see, what happens. This is also where you can sign up and deploy your own subgraph. And that's it. Here's just a few last links. We'd love for you to join us.
Well, thank you for that. So no, we're definitely excited to have you guys here. So I have the whole JavaScript bias, so I tend to kind of go after these, some of the, Near was up before you, and I think their project is amazing. I mean, obviously, as you guys know, y'all are working with them pretty closely, and so we really appreciate it. If anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them in here. And otherwise, I'll probably stay on for a little bit after you to kind of help. I'm trying to kind of create a bigger context and link all this serverless stuff up with everything going on with blockchain to kind of help them understand the big picture. So
awesome.
Well, thank you for your time, and we will keep in touch and let you know how the hackathon went.
Thank you so much. Look forward to it.
Take care. Bye. So yeah, the graph is a super exciting project. A couple of the projects that I'm most excited about in this space are Near and the graph. And, and I think, again, we talked about yesterday about API development. I mean, you already know, in trying to develop modern, sort of software engineering skills, React for front end development, which includes sort of React Native for the mobile side. And then on the back end, Node.js, is important. But, and then just realize, and a lot of you already know this, the two main ways to build APIs are REST APIs. And you may not have heard of GraphQL, but it's really important that you start learning GraphQL.